Welcome to the Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community, a space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Luke Mickelson. Luke's life has always been defined by community, character, and hard work. After a successful career in business, he realized something was missing, a deeper sense of purpose. In 2012, he took a simple act of kindness and turned it into Sleep in Heavenly Peace, one of the fastest growing nonprofits in the world. Luke has spent the last decade mentoring hundreds of leaders and proving that anyone can create massive change, starting in their own backyard. Whether he's being recognized by Mike Rowe on Returning the Favor or competing on American Ninja Warrior, Luke's message remains the same. Real impact happens when we stop waiting and start serving. He now shares this blueprint for community-driven change with audiences everywhere, helping them unlock their potential through the power of service. Okay, well, hi, Luke. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this platform with me. I'm really grateful and honored that you want to be on here and, share the work that you do. I think the work that you do is so inspiring. You've done so much beautiful things for people. But how are you doing today?
Oh, great. Well, thanks for having me, Denise. And it's a pleasure to meet you and pleasure to meet your audience. And I hope that, my message today can resonate with someone out there and inspire people to go do good, go be the good in their own communities. And, my story kind of starts and leads people hopefully towards that objective. But thank you for putting on a podcast that does that, right?
Yeah.
We've got to have a platform to be able to share it with people. And I always tell podcasters, it's an honor to be on here because, you're taking time out of your day to share good things with people in the world, especially during a time of hard to find good things to talk about. So thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for saying that. And really, podcasts like this really couldn't exist without people like you. So thank you for the work that you do, every day. And, I can't wait to hear more about your journey and the work that you do. So just starting off, can you take us back to 2012? So what was happening in your life when you built that first bed in your garage?
Yeah, I'm a regular schmo, right? I tell people I'm a farm kid from Idaho, and that's important to understand because I think a lot of what I learned in growing up in a small town helped me get to the decision, maybe even subconsciously decision to do what I did. But at the time, I had a great job. I was making some pretty good money, and I was coaching my kids and serving in my church. And, I had a life. It was great. On paper, you'd think I'd be really blessed. And I was very grateful, but I also felt that something was missing, right? I felt like I was going through a little bit of a faith crisis. I was going through, identity crisis. Why am I here? And what's the purposes of life? And what's success measured by, and all these things that you kind of, as a midlife, you stop and think, okay, I'm halfway through my life. What really matters, And I don't know. For me, anyways, I started asking all these questions, and I enjoyed my life. I just wasn't being fulfilled, and sitting in this kind of dilemma. And I had been for several years. It was just getting worse and worse. I was always reaching out, trying to find ways to get out of this rut, and find something I'm happy and have purpose behind. And one day I was in a meeting and I served back then in my church in a position called the Young Men's President, which was responsible for the spiritual growth and the activities of the Young Men's Program, which was boys ages 12 to 17. Okay. And the activity arm was Boy Scouts, right? So basically I was the leader of the Boy Scouts, I went on some, did some activities with them, but I helped the leaders find activities to do, finding an activity for 12, 13, 14-year-old teenage kids nowadays that doesn't involve a screen or a computer or an Xbox, it's kind of hard to do. Yeah. But in this position, I held there was meetings I attended every other week, and with other leaders, and we talk about what's going on in the community. We we talk about what's going on within the congregation and people we were helping. And there was one family that kind of stood out. First, because they lived in a part of town. Got to remember, I'm from a small town, 4,000 people, right?
Wow.
They lived in this part of town that I didn't even know existed, which was shocking to me because I'd lived there most of my life.
Yeah.
And then the leader started talking about the things that she saw when she visited the house, right? Because we were helping them, and she rattled off, the mom needs a ride to work, and the dad. They need food, and the kids don't have any beds, and they need coats and stuff. And I was like, wait a minute. Did you just say the kids didn't have any beds? Like, what do you mean by that? Certainly they got some mattresses. And she says, no, they're actually just sleeping on the floor. Oh. And that just really hit me hard, Denise. I was like, really? In our day and age, we got kids that they don't have a bed? Certainly, that's unheard of. And they start thinking about my own kids, what that would be like for my own kids to sleep on the floor. And I had young ones, 6, 7, 10 years old. Yeah. And then I thought about my Boy Scouts, and I thought, oh, what a great opportunity I have to pull an Xbox controller out of these boys' hands and put a drill in it, and we'll teach them something, right?
I love that.
And so that's what I did. I was really excited, and I told the boys what we were going to do, and went home that night and took a tape measure and a pen and paper and went down. And my daughter had a bunk bed and started measuring this bunk bed. And after it was all said and done, I had this idea, right? Mm-hmm. I had the blueprints. And so I went and got all the wood, got all the materials I needed, and then the boys showed up, Wednesday night, and it took a couple of nights, but boy, we had fun building this bunk bed together. Cool. I could see the boys appreciating what they were doing, having fun with power tools, but mostly I think they appreciated knowing where this bed was going to go, to a family and some kids that were sleeping on the floor. So I was really excited about that, but the time came to deliver the bed.
Okay.
And there were so many people that had heard about it. The word kind of got out. A lot of people showed up to my house to be a part of this event, this delivery event. Okay. And I mean, we couldn't send 20, 30 people over to this small 2-bedroom apartment. So me and a bunch of leaders stayed back while we let the kids and their parents and other leaders go. And so I stayed back, which was fine. I wanted the boys to have this great experience. And, the next day at church, they told me how awesome it was, the kids and how they reacted, and the parents, how grateful they were. I mean, I was super happy for the kids, but I was also super jealous that I missed out on it, Yeah. But that was it, right? We built the bed. We solved the problem. Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of funny how life just kind of creeps itself back in, right? Mm-hmm. You go back to the couch per se, and go back into the rut that you're feeling. And, this was just 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas. It was right after Thanksgiving, and my kids had Christmas on their mind. And while I was still sitting in my rut trying to figure out how to get out of this, give myself my own pep talks, and then a commercial came on the TV when me and my kids were watching our show. And it was, I don't even remember, it's about some Xbox game, something, right? And being it's around Christmas time, I knew what was going to happen next. I could read my kids' minds, right? And I, half of me was like, don't you dare. and sure enough, hey, Dad, can we get another Xbox? This one's cool, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on this couch just in turmoil, right? And we had just built this bed for this family, which, lifted my spirits, filled my soul. It was just so awesome. And now to go back to where I was almost made it worse. Not almost, it did. It just made it worse. And I'm trying to talk myself out of this. And then my kids say that. Mm-hmm. And it just hit me perfectly, right? I was like, my Boy Scouts had a great time. I think they learned a lot. They learned the value of service, right? They learned the value of what they have and the what fulfillment when it comes to serving people brings. And I'm like, you know what? As a dad, I wanted that for my own kids. Yeah. And they needed it. And the next thing you knew, I was standing up and I started walking towards the garage door. And my kids are like, Dad, where are you going? And I said, you know what? I've got more wood out in the garage. I'm going to build another bunk bed, and you're going to come help me.
That's wonderful.
And we had fun. I had pictures of my daughter in a little pink tutu out there hammering away, and my son in his Boise State jersey drilling boards together. We just had a lot of fun building this bed together. And it didn't, the purpose was not to, provide a bed for a kid at first, because I didn't know it, right? We had solved the problem already. But I wanted my kids to know the joy of service and to appreciate the things they have, like a bed. They've got a bed, And so we built this bed and then finished it. The sad part of it, I don't know if it's sad, but the strange part of it was, now I didn't know what to do with it. I had this bunk bed that I finished, and I'm like, what are we going to do with this thing?
Right.
And someone recommended I put on buy, sell, trade.
Okay.
And I was on the Facebook, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is, but sure, why not, right? Yeah. So I did that, and I wasn't very familiar with Facebook at the time. I didn't know what to expect. Yeah. Well, what happened, I certainly didn't expect. And a couple of things happened. A bunch of people I had no idea who they were, and some were friends I hadn't talked to for 20 plus years, were commenting on this post. And that was surprising how many of them there were. And the second thing that was so surprising was they all knew kids that were sleeping on the floor. Wow. And they shared with me the conditions that they were sleeping, right? We're talking on pallets, on hard cement floors in basements with no, with just framed walls and 2 or 3 kids to a bed. It just was really shocking to see how many and the conditions, right, that they're sleeping in. And I got pretty excited. I was first shocked, but then I got pretty excited because I had this bunk bed I wanted to deliver to a special situation, because it was something me and my kids put together.
I love that.
Well, the next day, I get a call from a friend of mine, and she said, I served a mission with her, and she says, hey, have you delivered that bed yet? I said, actually, I haven't. No, why?
Yeah.
And she worked in the social services sector and helping transitioning homelessness and working with people. And she says, well, I have a family, and this is my Haley story. So this is my first delivery.
Okay.
Haley was a 6-year-old girl that never slept on a bed.
Oh,
she only slept in the backseat of her mom's car. That's the only bed she knew. And that right there alone was enough for me to go, okay, we need to solve this problem, right?
Right.
So we took this bed out to Haley's house, and she didn't know where we're coming. Her and her mom, she had a single mom. And, we walk into this house, and I don't know, Denise, we've probably all been there, and we've seen poverty, and if you haven't, you've seen it on TV or something like that. And, you can get a sense of how horrible it is. But this was probably the first time I ever walked into a situation like this with the mindset or the through the eyes of a 6-year-old, right? And when you do that, that's when you start noticing the little things, like, they don't have a couch, but that means she doesn't have a place to watch cartoons. They don't have a TV. They don't have a table or chair to eat cereal, their morning Lucky Charms. It's just, you start seeing things differently. And it was really heartbreaking. You couldn't tell from Haley. She was so excited to have kids or have, people over to her house. She had a house, right? And then I said, hey, Haley, why don't you show me where you sleep? Where's your bedroom? And so she's pulled us back into her bedroom. And you can imagine what that looked like, right? There's holes in the carpet, and the wallpaper parts are missing, and there's no closet door. I mean, it was just a really rough situation. But all of that didn't even compare to how odd, how sad I felt when I looked over in the corner and there was a pile of clothes. And I knew instantly that's where Haley slept. Oh. She would come home from school, put on her PJs, sleep on her school clothes, pillow for a shirt for a pillow and a pair of pants for a blanket. And then she put those same shirt and pants on the next morning and go to school. And that's when it just was so shocking to me. I was almost upset. And then I got excited again because we had brought her a bed, and we started bringing in these pieces of the bed, putting it together, right? And I was watching her. I was going to see how she reacted when she realized it was bed. And I mean, I knew she would be happy, but that's just an understatement. I mean, she just erupted.
Wow.
And to come over and hug a couple of strange guys, these strange dudes in her room making all sorts of racket, and then she did something I'd never seen before. She went over and hugged and kissed this bunk bed that we brought. That's how much it meant to her. And if that wasn't enough to just kill you, pull your heartstrings out, you look up and here's mom, single mom, right? Doing the best she can. And tears, 6 years of tears pouring down this lady's face. And me being raised by a single mom too, I knew what those meant. I knew what those tears meant. And right then I knew, okay, wait, this is way more than just a bed. Right. This is way more than just a good night's sleep for this daughter. This is relieving this mom of guilt and worry and frustration and all the things that she's been experiencing and wished she could provide for her child. Food, clothing, shelter. That's the top three, right? Of what parents try to focus in on, or at least provide first. After that, like a bed, they're just luxuries to these people and to this situation. And that's terrible. It should never be that way. Yeah. And that was my first delivery.
Wow, no, that's really beautiful. And something I want to point out too, I think it's really cool how not only are you addressing like the issue of like bedlessness, but also like you're inspiring and instilling like this appreciation of service for children as well. So I have also a 10-year-old daughter, and I put her into Girl Scouts for that same reason too, to like start having that appreciation. But I think that's really cool though, that how you were able to like do both of those like with that single act. And I was just wondering too, was there a moment when it became more than just like performing like a good deed for like a family or for like individuals or for a child, and it became more of like, this is a mission, this is something that it became bigger for you than just doing a good deed for someone?
You're absolutely right. And it was probably several moments that combined into determination. I remember sitting on that couch, or excuse me, on Haley's bed with her, why they brought in all the sheets and stuff. And I remember, and I tell people, listen, if you would just pause for a minute, your audience right now, just pause for a second, put your work down, or turn your TV on, or pause it or something, and take a moment and just think about, what would it be like as a child to not have a bed to sleep in? And when you stop and think about it, you realize, number one, let's talk about just the physical aspect of what that means, right? These kids wake up, they're not fully rested. They're probably sore and stiff from laying on the floor, right? And so when they go to school, they're not ready for school, right? Their grades suffer, their attitude's bad. They, the good chance they run into the wrong crowd, because they're just not a happy kid, or as happy as they could be. And then you think about on the psychological, mental side of things. These kids can't have sleepovers. They don't even want people really into the room because they're embarrassed. And then they go to their friend's house, who not only has a bed, they got freaking throw pillows. And what that does to that child, and probably the feeling of am I as loved as this child here? Why don't I have these things? You can only imagine. And then you think about, you and I, when we have a bad day at work, or, something happens, or heaven forbid, we get the flu, right? Where's the one place on the entire planet that we all want to go to when we're in that situation, right? We want to crawl into our bed. I speak all over the country, and I still have yet found a bed that I would rather sleep in than my own, and it has nothing to do with how comfy it is. It's my sanctuary, and these kids don't have that. They don't get to escape, and when you stop and really think about that, I remember on the way home from that delivery, me and my buddy Jordan really didn't say much to each other. It was that overwhelming. And I remember thinking, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I love hunting and fishing and outdoors and college football on Saturdays and all this stuff that I enjoyed doing. But in a split second, snap of a finger, none of that really mattered to me anymore. I remember thinking, I spent a couple hours a night with my kids building a bed to solve that problem. Okay, yeah, that's well worth my time. And you got to remember, I was still fighting this internal battle of really what is most important in life. What do I want to be remembered for? What kind of legacy I want to leave behind? And it wasn't that I watched college football or caught the biggest fish. Right. Those were fun,
Uh-huh.
but it wasn't a fulfillment that I was looking for. And when I hit this,
Mm-hmm.
Denise, I remember looking over to my friend finally when I had the composure to speak. I
Uh-huh.
said, Jordan, no kid's going to sleep on the floor in my town if I have anything to do with it. I was
Mm-hmm.
really serious, and that's when I think it really changed for me. Making that commitment, even subconsciously, I just made that commitment. I couldn't think of anything worse than a child
Mm-hmm.
sleeping on the floor, especially during Christmas. And so we went to town and we built 21 beds that first Christmas
Oh.
season and delivered them all before Santa showed up.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And, I'm just wondering, why do you think that this issue is still largely invisible? Because I feel like this is something that's not widely talked about.
100%. And that's why I'm so glad you have me on, because child
Mhm.
bedlessness, the funny thing, the ironic thing is bedlessness, it doesn't even know it's not a word. It doesn't even know it doesn't
Okay.
exist, right?
Hmm.
But
Right.
it does. And child bedlessness may not be a real word, but it's a real problem.
Uh-huh.
It represents greater than 3% of the total population of any given town on average. So if you're in a town of 100,000 people, there's more than 3% or 3,000
Wow.
kids that are sleeping on the floor.
Okay.
And that was a shocker. And for me, the more we
Hmm.
delivered and the more we shared on Facebook and social media what we were doing, the more kids got uncovered, the more stories came in
Okay.
of
Okay.
situations, and it was just shocking to me, right, that this was going on in my own hometown. And
Hmm.
and the more I researched and studied, the more I unearthed, if you will, that this is a
Right.
major problem.
Uh-huh.
And I remember thinking, and when we decided, the next year, maybe we
Hmm.
should be a charity. We can't finance this all ourselves. I
Hmm.
did like I did what I think anybody would do. I went to the internet to try to find another nonprofit that provides beds for kids and see how they did
Okay.
it and what blah blah blah.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't find one.
Uh-huh.
After a few days of looking on the internet, I found one organization in Charlotte that was building beds for kids, and they had actually stopped building
Wow.
beds. They were just providing beds for kids. So
Okay.
it was really shocking to me. That was the first thing that indicated that, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
there's a problem here that no one's taking care of. And then again, as I shared more and more on social media, I started getting calls from organizations
Hmm.
like CASA, foster care, child
Hmm.
protective services, any of these social services that were providing, and were advocating for children and families.
Okay.
And they told me, well, Luke, I was like their best friend. Like I was like their,
Yeah.
they loved me, right? And it's because they said, Luke, you don't realize a bed for a child
Uh-huh.
most of the time is the hardest thing. Get that,
Hmm.
the hardest thing for them to obtain. I mean,
Yeah.
over couch or a table or a TV. Isn't that crazy? A bed for a child. It blew me away. And so that's why it's so hidden. You
Okay.
don't want to ask the question when you don't have a solution for it. And
Right.
they didn't, right? Now that they do, they start asking. This is a milestone for me when I realized that these agencies now actually go in before they even go into the house. They actually go into the family and ask, "Hey, do your children have beds?"
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
No, that's good that they actually recognize that now. And um,
100%.
yeah, no, that's cool. And something about me, so like I think as a young professional, I learned that nonprofit work also like contributes to social change because I think fairly young I had like a social justice mindset, but I think it didn't click for me until I actually was doing the work because I think prior to me being in the nonprofit field, I thought of it as like, oh, maybe it's just putting band-aids on the community, but really seeing how this work also can help towards community empowerment and
Oh,
just towards like
100%.
equity issues. So with that, I'd love to talk with you more about your work with the volunteers. So you've mobilized volunteers who never saw themselves as change makers. So how do you help people to shift in that mindset that they're actually making a difference in the community, even if they might just see it as, a simple act of making a bed?
Great question.
Hmm.
This was the interesting thing that happened. Remember, I said there's a lot of people
Yeah.
that that commented on these posts and
Hmm.
said, hey, I know this child, I know this child. But equally amount, maybe even a little bit more,
Okay.
there were people that was like, Luke, how can I
Hmm.
help? This is awesome.
I
Can I
love
bring you a
that.
mattress, sheet sets? Can I come over and stain? There were times there were people in my garage during that first Christmas season. I didn't even know who they were. They just came with a
Oh,
buddy and helped sand and stain these
wow.
21 beds we
Wow.
built, right? And that's where I realized, there are millions and millions of people out there that
Mm-hmm.
want to give back. They really do want to help. They just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a great lesson. This is my Hank story. If you don't
Okay.
mind me sharing
Yeah,
my
of
Hank story.
course. Of course.
And all you nonprofits out there,
Right.
listen, if you run a nonprofit, you struggle with volunteers, and every nonprofit does, right?
Right. Right.
Let me give you the secret. Okay, this is the secret, everybody. Get your pens out. So Hank, okay, we had just got a pretty rundown warehouse to use, which I
Okay.
was super grateful for, and we had raised enough money that we were going to do what we call a public build, which we don't have a
Mm.
sponsor. It's not just for them. It's for anybody that wants to come and build beds. And
Okay.
so I posted, it was the first time I posted in the newspaper, and keep in mind, it was January in Idaho in a
Wow.
warehouse that was heated by one small little tiny wood fire stove in the
Oh
corner.
my goodness.
Not
Wow.
exactly a warm tropical place for someone to
Right.
come
Right.
over on a Saturday morning. So I was a little skeptical how many people we'd get to show up. But we had a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then in walks this guy named Hank.
Yeah.
Hank's like 700 years old. I mean, I tell you what, he's walking with that grandpa limp, but he had
Mm-hmm.
that grandpa smile. You just immediately loved him, right? And he
Yeah.
comes up to me and he says, you the guy? And I'm like, sure, why not, Hank? How you doing?
Uh-huh.
And he said, where do you need me? And my first thought was, well, I don't need you to die on me. That would be
Oh
terrible.
no.
And I said, well, tell me what you do for a living. And he says, I was a
Right.
carpenter for 40 years. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know
Oh,
exactly where to put you, brother.
okay.
If there's one part of our assembly of these beds you
Right.
can't screw up,
Mm-hmm.
is cutting wood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, why don't you, and it's the most dangerous part of our process, the miter saw. So I put him on that, and not surprisingly, he picked it up right away. In fact, he probably could have showed me a few things, right?
Okay.
But I put him on this assignment. Well, the funny thing about being a chapter president in
Mm-hmm.
a room of 50, 60 people that have never built a bed before in their life, some of them had never even touched a drill before. And now you
Okay.
got to teach them how to do this. Needless to say, you run around like a chicken with your head cut off, right? You're
Right.
just
Right.
you're busy. Well, I had lost track of time. I was busy. I was answering questions. 4 hours go by, Denise, and I'm like, oh my
Wow.
gosh, I forgot about Hank. Is he alive?
Oh no.
So I run back there in the front. It was in front of the train, and there
Yeah.
was Hank still sawing away, and his face and clothes were covered in sawdust. It was as white as his
Oh.
hair.
Okay.
And I remember I kind of tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around and I said, Hank, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about you. I've
Oh
been running
no.
around. And he looked at me,
Uh-huh.
he wiped off the sawdust off his face,
Mm-hmm.
got really serious. And he says, Luke, let me tell you something. And I was like, thinking in my head, oh, great. Here we go. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I've spent my whole life volunteering at organizations, helping out the communities the best I could.
Yeah.
He says, I have never shown up to an event, and in less than 5 minutes, I was put on an assignment, and I
Oh.
could not leave that assignment,
Yeah.
period. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't get a glass of water because people counted on me to finish my assignment, right?
Oh wow.
And I remember
Mhm.
thinking, in fact, I told him, I said, Hank, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he held up his hand. He's like, no, 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 no. Thank you. And I
Wow.
learned right then, and this is the secret.
Mhm.
Volunteers want to feel fulfilled.
Right.
They want to feel
Right.
like they actually did something.
Mhm.
So when you provide a service to
Mhm.
your volunteers, an experience where they can feel fulfilled, they feel like they're actually a part of it. They're not just pushing a broom or punching a button. They're
Uh-huh.
actually being a part of it. And the next day they feel it. They feel the ache and the pain of
Yeah.
working hard. That's where volunteer
Mm.
experiences turn into fulfillment. And that's where communities and people that are trying to find ways to give back, they want to feel fulfilled. They want to feel like
Yeah.
they made a difference. And nonprofits out there, that's the key. Don't make
Mm.
your service too light for these
Okay.
volunteers, because we need to bring them together. When you're
Right.
serving next to someone, you don't give two whatevers, whether they're Republican or Democrat
Yeah.
or religious or not, or you don't care. You're there for one common purpose, and when you get the same fulfillment
Mm-hmm.
providing a bed for a little human being that doesn't have
Yeah.
one, that bonds you together. And that's what we need. That's where I found out, listen, we provide beds for kids. That's our mission, no question.
Right.
But we also have a second mission, and that's bringing communities together.
I love
These
that.
people probably would have passed each other in the
Mm-hmm.
grocery store without saying a word, right?
Yeah.
Had they not either participated in a build or went on a delivery or met each other with the common goal of let's get a
Mm-hmm.
bed to a child. That's the
Yeah.
secret.
No, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I love that approach and perspective that you have. And, also I think it's really cool to see like how this has really expanded for you, but I can imagine that coming with challenges as well. So how do you maintain mission integrity across hundreds of chapters? I can imagine that being a challenge as well.
It's a challenge. The funny thing is it's a beautiful
Hmm.
challenge.
Okay.
And these people, they're helping out. They're a part of
Yeah.
SHP or a part of any nonprofit. Why? Because they
Hmm.
got a big heart and they want to help.
Hmm.
And it's hard with a big heart to go into a house and see so much need. So
Yeah.
many other things that these kids need and these families. It's hard to stay focused
Uh-huh.
on really what your mission is. And I learned a very valuable lesson. Luckily,
Hmm.
before, I mean, I just kind of dumb luck fell into it, I guess.
Okay.
There's something called mission creep.
Hmm.
And mission creep. Every nonprofit, if you don't know about it, you need to learn about it. Mission
Okay.
creep will kill a nonprofit faster than anything, and
Okay.
that is doing more than what your mission originally
Hmm.
was set out to be. And in
Hmm.
my book that I'm coming out here in a couple of months, I talk about mission creep and I talk about the values and the
Hmm.
importance of staying true to your original mission, right?
Hmm.
And
Right.
that's how, it's hard to keep people that are big-hearted and live states and states away from you
Hmm.
and to go in there and have quote policy. I hated writing it because it felt you know, it's almost like saying, listen, there's a lot of need, but don't help out. That
Hmm.
it's hard for people to understand why that's important. But I knew way back in the day, listen, I don't have time. I work a full-time job. I've got
Okay.
kids. I've got church service. I've got things. I'm just going to focus in on building and delivering beds. I'm not going to
Mm.
provide anything else. And that right there, just like I said, dumb luck, that has
Yeah.
been one of the biggest success keys to how SHPs went from my garage
Uh-huh.
to 440 plus chapters in almost every state and in 4 countries.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And, I know you talked about this a little before, but I love to further explore it. I love how you brought different communities together. So SHP partners with businesses, churches, schools, and civic groups. So what makes a partnership truly transformational versus being like transactional?
Oh, fulfillment.
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
Providing that experience,
Hmm.
whether it's building beds or saving the ocean or helping pets or vets or whatever, when you feel like you've made a difference and you
Hmm.
have, right? That's what bonds people together.
I
It's
love
not
that.
transactional. You're right.
Yeah,
It's transformational,
I love
right?
that.
And the thing is, and I do a lot of public speaking on what I call tiny moments.
Okay.
We all have these moments of inspiration and things that we should get up off the couch and go do.
Uh-huh.
And we oftentimes, what happens, we excuse them away. I'm just as guilty as anybody, right?
Okay.
I'm too busy. I don't know how to do
Yeah.
that, right? It's not in my wheelhouse, someone else is already doing it, right? They've got it, right? These are all excuses that we use to justify why we don't want to get off the couch. The funny
Mm.
thing is,
Right. Right.
and this is important, we all
Uh-huh.
want to change, right? We all want to do better. We all want to feel like we're progressing
Hmm.
in our life, which means we got to change. There's not one person on the planet that says, I'm good with who I am. I'm done.
Right.
No,
Right.
they always want to do better, right?
Yeah.
Well, why doesn't it happen? Why do
Hmm.
people not? They want to change, they want to be better, and they have a hard time doing it.
Hmm.
Well, the reason is because wanting to change, that's easy.
Right.
That's we dream about that. That's what dreams are made of, and we need that. But the
Yeah.
desire to change
Hmm.
isn't strong enough, or excuse me, the desire to act on your
Uh-huh.
change isn't strong enough. And so, if you want real change in your life, stop working on and thinking about wanting to change. Start working on and thinking about the action it's going to take to change. If you don't put any time towards that, it probably won't happen. And what I mean by that is, for me, keep in mind, I didn't build that first bunk bed because I wanted to end child bedlessness. I didn't even know that there was a kid out there that had another kid that didn't have a bed. I did it because I wanted my kids, my desire to make a change in my kids. You know what? I wanted that to happen, and for me as well. And I came to a point where I had to do something. I couldn't sit and just think about it and dream my life away. I had to get off the couch, right? And so, working on, and I try to train people, working on your desire to act, it needs to be greater than your desire to want to change. So
Right. No, I really love that. And, I don't know how you're feeling about the current way that, just things are going on, but I just feel like there's so much division right now. And
yeah,
I feel like people are focusing a lot more on the differences because I think I'm even guilty with this, like seeing, that us versus them mentality versus like seeing how have more in common with each other. So
right.
what does human helping humans look like in a time when our country often feels so divided?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical.
Okay.
If you think there's pros and cons to everything, right? There's pros
Yeah.
and cons to politics,
Hmm.
athletics,
Hmm.
religion. All of these things are meant to make us grow, and they
Right.
also bring in different points of view and perspectives. And when that happens, that's
Uh-huh.
when ego and pride and all these other things jump in the way.
Hmm.
And listen, I get it. I'm the same way. I've got my opinions, and I'm passionate about them just like anybody.
Uh-huh.
But if SHP has taught me one thing, and if humans helping humans, and that
Right.
slogan, that mission, that motto, internal model that I've carried with me,
Hmm.
it helps me keep it in perspective.
Okay. Okay.
Denise, you and I, we may differ on politics or religion, whatever it is, right?
Right.
But I tell you what, there's one thing that you and I have in common,
Yeah.
very common.
Hmm.
We're human beings, for crying out loud.
No,
And the other
totally.
thing is we share this planet together,
Hmm.
And I think that's why it's so easy and so fulfilling
Uh-huh.
working and helping out and volunteering with Sleep and Emily Peace, because
Yeah.
these are little humans,
Right.
and they're in these situations not because of their choices.
Hmm.
They're in these situations because of someone else's choices, and sometimes not even their choices, just bad luck,
Yeah.
a house fire, a loss of job or downsizing or whatever, right? How many
Hmm.
times do I can tell you it's way too many times that
Hmm.
we help a single mom that grabbed a grocery bag, as
Hmm.
much clothes and stuff as she can handle, her kids, threw them in a car and took off, right?
Mm.
To escape some really bad situations. That's a pretty common occurrence.
Yeah.
These human beings that we share this planet with, that's how I wish and I hope, at least
Hmm.
maybe on the basic level, that we look at one another. And
I
when you
love
break it
that.
down, you realize you're no different than me, and I'm no different than you. I'm
Yeah.
not bigger or taller or shorter. I mean, maybe physically, but
Right.
but stature and stuff like,
Yeah.
no, we're just humans. We're
I
just
love
humans. And I
that.
tell everybody has value. Everybody does.
Yeah.
Even the bum that's on the street, he's got value. Now he doesn't see it, and maybe you don't see it, but it's there somewhere because he's a
Yeah.
human being, and humans helping humans really should be the reason why we go out and serve.
Yeah.
And I tell people,
Yeah.
listen, you know, getting off the couch is hard. And
Hmm.
and I'm a farm kid from Idaho, man. I'm a nobody.
Hmm.
I,
No,
I'm
no, yeah.
I'm like anybody else, right?
Yeah.
And I want that to be very clear because I don't want people to use the excuse that, that I know I
Yeah.
would have. They put people on podcasts or TV or hear them on
Hmm.
radio. They put them on a pedestal and think
Yeah.
that they're any different than the people listening on the couch at home. No,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not. We're human beings, and you can be a human that can help another human.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that too. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast. So I think because of my personal networks, a lot of folks are more progressive because that's how I lean as well. But what I really want to show with this podcast is that it shouldn't be a left or right issue. I feel like making our community stronger and better should be across the political spectrum. I feel like we get into disagreements when, I think when we actually start to talk to people, we can be like, oh, actually, we agree more than we disagree. We just use different labels, different ways of saying things. But yeah, I feel like it should be like everyone should want to make a difference in the community, regardless of political affiliation or beliefs.
It's hard.
No, totally.
There's things that come up politically, religiously that we're all going to differ on, and that's actually the beautiful part of being a human is, if we all believed the same thing and all helped out the same charity, we wouldn't get very far. There'd be a lot of beds built, but there wouldn't be any kids because they're hungry or, what I'm saying? There's just a lot of different interests, and we should celebrate those interests, those differences. And, and that doesn't mean that there's not hard decisions that need to be made. Of course, I tell people, listen, if you want true joy in life, true joy, you need to stop thinking about yourself and see how you can help someone else out. And I'll tell you what happens when you do that. Your problems aren't going to go away. Of course not. You still got to do the proposal for work, and you got that presentation, and you got to deal with an upset kid. I mean, you still have problems. But I will promise you one thing. When you take time to serve others and think about others, your problems are going to feel far less heavy, right? And they probably are. I tell people, listen, you got to turn around and face the monster at some point. And when you do, you realize, oh, this monster's not that big. If you don't see it, your mind creates this horror story of how big this monster really is. But when you finally turn around and face it and see it, you can start shrinking that monster, and then you'll find ways around it, or through it, or over it, whatever the analogy is. And I think service really helps us get into a perspective, a frame of mind where we can do that. I mean, how many times you're like frustrated, blah, 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 and then you do a good deed, or someone, something happens that changes your perspective, and now you can go, oh, you know what? I can handle that. I can get past that, right? And I think service is one of the fastest and more successful way to get in that that frame of mind, that perspective, right?
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful. And, I'd love for you to speak directly to the listeners. So for someone listening who feels overwhelmed by the state of the world, what would you want to say to them?
Just that. Listen, I'm with you. I feel you. I don't want to get emotional here. You're talking to a cat that was in that situation, and I spent a lot of time scrolling on, talk radio and social media and just working myself up, right? And I'm not saying these issues are something you ignore. Of course not. You're passionate about them. That's awesome. It's awesome. But understand, right, that there's perspectives out there, and to enjoy the differences that we have. And the best way to get into that frame of mind is go and serve. Go take your mind off of that and think about the troubles of someone else, and then help them solve that, right? Anybody right now that's listening can go to our website, shpbeds.org.
Okay.
And it's going to come up. That webpage isn't going to come to some big national organization. It used to.
Okay.
But we found it's what we want to portray here. Yeah, we're a national organization, international really. But that doesn't matter to us. Where the rubber meets the road is locally. So when you bring up shpbeds.org, you're going to find the local chapter. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see how many kids that chapter's trying to get beds to. You're going to see how many kids they did get beds to, the events that's going on that you can participate in, right? Go deliver a bed to a child. I promise you, when you're in the room and there's little Johnny here, right, hiding behind mom with all these people in a room making all sorts of racket, doing something. And then watch them the minute Johnny realizes that he's getting a bed for his first time ever. Yeah. And when he crawls into that bed at 3:00 in the afternoon and goes to sleep, then go back and think, okay, what was I thinking about? How critical is that? How important is that? How much weight am I going to give that? And I promise you, it's going to feel far less heavy. And I think if you listeners out there would just practice that, challenge me on that, and it doesn't have to be SHP, go do something. But if you're looking for that and helping children, I'm an advocate for this, right? So if you're looking to help children out, I mean, go to our website and see how you can help. And if there's not a chapter close by you, and this really, really pours and or tugs at your heartstrings, start one. You know, we have people that they don't know anything about running a business or starting a nonprofit, and they're very successful running a chapter of Sleeping on the Peace. We make sure of that, right? We make it as easy as we possibly can, you know, because that's how it's going to be solved. And if there's anything I can ask you to do, right? We're a nonprofit. You can donate your time, materials. That's great. But if there's one thing I can ask you to do that's free, is just share the message. Child bedlessness, I'm sure you probably didn't realize till today how huge this problem really is. Right. And you didn't know it. So guess what? No one around you does either. So change that. Say something to them. Share this podcast. Share what you learned today. Go do a little research. Find out how many kids are really sleeping on the floor in your town. I promise you, you'll surprise people when you realize and find out exactly what we're talking about today. So please help me share this message.
No, thank you so much. And, thank you so much for your time. I had such a wonderful time talking with you. You do really incredible and beautiful work. You're such a beautiful soul yourself. But, just as we're wrapping up, if you could leave our listeners with one message about service and solidarity, what would it be?
Act. Just act on it. Listen, you might not change the world, but you're going to change someone's world. Right. And maybe that someone is just you. And that's great. Yeah. That puts you in a much better position to help the next person. Denise, growing up, I was, like I mentioned, I grew up in there's 5 kids and a single mom. I mean, you want to talk about not having a lot of material stuff, right? But we lived in a great community. And I remember one time for Christmas, right after my parents divorced, I knew we weren't going to have much for Christmas. So I walk out to pick up the mail in my mailbox, and there in the mailbox was an envelope full of $1,500 in cash. Unmarked,
wow.
And it was from our community, and I remember thinking, you know what, someone did when they could for someone that couldn't. I want to be when I can to do for someone who can't, and that's where real fulfillment comes from. And that's where joy beyond measure, I think, can come from. And so if you're out there looking for that and wanting it, there's some action. And like I mentioned earlier, work on the action, work on how to do that. Don't think that's just one small step. That's the biggest step. So work on that and then act on it. Get out, go and help your neighbor, go mow your neighbor's lawn or take their trash out or do something, even just give someone a call you haven't talked to and forgive them. That is a human thinking about just another human being.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, just going to what you were saying, like, it might be in like people's eyes, like just helping one life. But like, if you think about it, if everyone does something for like someone, like it really could add up and really make a difference in our communities. And I don't know, I wonder sometimes if that's the reason why people are hesitant to do things and not do things in the first place, because they think it like is too small or won't make a difference. But yeah, to me, I feel like there's no act of kindness or act of service that's too small. Like everything adds up.
It compounds, right? And again, it's like I said, you might not do one thing and then end up starting the largest bed building charity in the world, right? But I'll tell you what, none of that wouldn't have happened had I not got off the couch to want to teach my kids a very, very simple lesson, right? So this huge organization started out with a very, very simple get off the couch action, right? And you just never know the ripple effect that it has. And now we have hundreds of thousands of volunteers. We've built almost 400,000 beds really since 2018, and we have, as you and I speak right now, there's 160,000 kids on our waiting list, right? Wow. So if you're looking for something to do, and then we're only covering 28% of the United States. So do that math, right? Okay. Think about all those kids. There's tens of millions of kids right now that need our help with a problem that people don't even know exists. That's the worst part of it. So you can be the difference in someone's life.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you again for taking the time to share your story and share your journey with us. But lastly, how can people find you if they'd like to connect with you? I know you mentioned a little before, but are there other ways that people could connect with the work as well?
You bet. Yeah. Obviously, shpbeds.org. You'll find the chapter there. You'll find their social medias. You'll learn how to connect with them. If you're looking for me, hit me up on social media. I'm on all of them, right?
Okay.
So if you just type in Luke Mickelson or SHP Luke, you're going to find me pretty quick. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm at luke.mickelson@shpbeds.org. I'm an open book, right? Because I feel like it's really important. I'm a human being just like you. And if I can provide even just a little bit of a spark that can ignite something in you, I promise you, if this farm kid here can do something like that's been done, anybody can, and you can be that person. And it might not be anything grandioso, and that's just fine. Like I said, you're going to change someone's world, and maybe that world is just yours.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, thank you again. And I wish you all the best moving forward, with this work. I hope that it continues to expand more and more and, more chapters pop up. I think this is important work, and also not just the work itself, but its awareness. And, I hope to stay connected with you. And thank you again for your time. I hope that you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. No problem. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.